That's Life Unlimited.
Said we'd never break the 3-second rule. Never do that. And never become a minivan mom.
Hey, Chris.
As parents, we say never a lot, but never happens. So when you say you'd never leave your child in a hot car, know it can happen. Before you leave the car, always stop, look, lock.
Good afternoon, I'm Josh Robin. You're watching Decision 2024 coverage on Spectrum News. It is just after 4 p.m. in Washington, D.C., where we are expecting to hear from Vice President Kamala Harris at any moment. She will be speaking from Howard University, where she was hoping to deliver a historic acceptance speech. Instead, this will be a concession speech. Former President Donald Trump is now President-elect Trump. The Vice President called him today and congratulated him. I have some of Spectrum's best political minds joining me for this coverage, but let me first start with Cassie Simeon. She is at Howard University, where she was until early this morning. She's been covering the Harris campaign for months. Cassie, what did the vice president talk about with the now president-elect? Do you have any details about that conversation?
So we do know she made that concession call to the president-elect at some point today, congratulating him on his win, but also emphasizing the need for a peaceful transition of power, as well as the fact that he needs to be a president for all Americans. This is something that she has said on the campaign trail time and time again. She's not just running to be a president for the people that support her, but a president for all Americans. She's hoping that will translate now with Trump being the president-elect, that he will not just be a president for those who have supported him up until this point, but a president for all Americans, as you also touched on. President Biden did give him a call as well today, and Biden did extend an invitation to the White House for the two men to meet, for the staffs to get coordinated, and to start this transition process. We're expected to hear from Biden tomorrow on this transition of power.
Cassie, this is a question that is going to be prompting books galore, dissertations, and a lot of conversation here. But has the finger pointing begun about what went wrong? How did all that excitement and campaign cash not translate when it mattered for Kamala Harris?
Well, it's hard to point a finger at any specific thing, right? Remember, she wasn't the nominee until just over 100 days ago when Joe Biden dropped out of the race and she became the presumptive nominee. So there wasn't a lot of time for her to campaign in a traditional sense. Meanwhile, the former president, now the president-elect, has been campaigning for the last 2 years, and really, when you look at it, over the last decade for this position. So it's hard to put a finger on the pulse of where, strategists think she went wrong. Perhaps it was talking about Trump too much and not talking about her own policies, her own ideas, not being able to distance herself from the president, who is deeply unpopular, despite the fact that the economy is booming. That hasn't translated to Americans' wallets, and she has been dinged on that time and time again by the former president, now the president-elect, and his supporters. That's something she had difficulty overcoming, and that could ultimately have hurt her last night. So it's one of those things we're still kind of gathering information. Votes are still being tallied. The votes are too insurmountable at this point for her to overcome them. We do know, in fact, that former President Donald Trump is President-elect Donald Trump now, but I think it will be a few days before we can really get a sense of where this campaign went wrong. And, there might not be one answer. There may be multiple answers. There was deep investments in the youth vote. We saw them hire 150 youth and campus organizers trying to drive out that vote. It didn't seem successful. We saw her reach out to black men and Latino men, and that didn't seem successful either. So there's a number of points where we can point to at this juncture that could be the answer to that question, Josh. But right now, there's too many what-ifs to answer your question.
Well, Cassie, we'll continue that conversation. But I definitely agree. There might be many more than one answer. We're going to shift over to the Trump campaign now and to Taylor Popolars. He's in West Palm Beach, Florida, where he has been for days now. What can we expect from the president-elect on day one. He said, and his critics will note this, that he would be a dictator on day one and jail his opponents. Is he sounding any different now that he's the president-elect?
So far, Josh, obviously Trump spoke overnight in the 2 to 3 o'clock hour. We were there for his speech. You and I were on the air, and he did what he did back in 2016 when he won, which is try to strike a message of unity, try to talk about moving past what he said last night was 4 years of division and insults and wanting to be a president for all Americans. But as we saw the first time that Trump won in 2016, once he took office, he took on a different tone. We received a statement from his communications director, Stephen Chung, this morning that acknowledged that phone call between Trump and Vice President Harris. And the campaign said at one point that President Trump acknowledged Vice President Harris on her strength, professionalism, and tenacity throughout the campaign, and both leaders agreed on the importance of unifying the country. What I think will be interesting is after Harris has her chance to address her election loss, we don't know if we're going to hear from Trump on camera or in person today, but as he starts to talk about his transition process and his vision for the second term in the White House, will he try to build upon this message of unifying the country, or is it simply a repeat of what he did the last time around, and will he dive right back into the attacks, the insults, and really pursuing the policies that he was campaigning on? We talked a bit about it last night, but Trump, for example, has been campaigning very specifically on conducting the largest deportation operation in American history. Potentially hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million immigrants who are in this country undocumented each year could be removed based on what Trump and his running mate, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, have said on the trail this year. So it's going to be interesting to kind of track what plays out in that sense. And over the next 2 months, we'll get an idea of who Trump is going to invite to join his new cabinet and his administration. There are a lot of key positions that have to be filled, and he's indicated that more controversial figures like the former presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could play key roles in his administration. So I think that'll be interesting to watch, and that'll give us kind of more of a direct take on how Trump is approaching the second term in office. So one last thing, Josh, that I just thought about. This will be the first time that Donald Trump will be in the White House while he's not running for re-election. If he's able to serve a full 4-year term, he is approaching 80 years old, but if he's able to serve a full 4-year term, he'll be able to focus strictly on his policy agenda and on what he campaigned on this year, which is retribution against his political enemies. So I think that could be much different compared to his first term in office when he was running for re-election throughout most of that.
Okay, Taylor, thank you so much. We're going to turn to my colleague Ayanna Harry, who is back at the big board. And a question that I asked more broadly to Cassie, which is how did Trump win this, or how did Harris lose this? But take a look at the numbers. How did he win 270?
Josh, President-elect Donald Trump won both the Electoral College and the popular vote. I want to start here with that electoral count. Here's the number that's required in order to secure 1,600 Pennsylvania, 270. Right now, Donald Trump at 292. He was able to get above 270 in the early morning hours after taking the state of Wisconsin. Kamala Harris right now 224 in the early morning hours. It became quite apparent that Kamala Harris no longer had a path to get to 270 electoral college votes. So how did Donald Trump win? What was his path to victory? Take a look at much of the southeast U.S. Donald Trump won states with a large number of electoral college votes, states like Texas and Florida. And take a look right here. Donald Trump won Georgia again. This is a state that Joe Biden won in 2020. Kamala Harris spent a lot of time in Georgia trying to keep the state blue in the presidential election, but she was not successful in Georgia. And here's where Donald Trump also did well. The blue wall states. These are states that decade after decade consistently voted for Democrats in the presidential election. Up until 2016, when Donald Trump turned these blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Trump turned them red in 2016. Joe Biden was able to flip them back blue in 2020. But as you can see, Donald Trump carrying all 3 blue wall battleground states this year, and that's how you get to this number, 292. Josh, I want to take one step back for a quick moment. I mentioned Trump also won the popular vote. Let's go ahead and take a look at that, see where the numbers stand. There's still a few more numbers coming in, but look right here, Josh. Let's do a comparison. Let's look at the difference. Donald Trump received 4.8 million more votes than Kamala Harris nationwide, leaving Trump with 51% of the national popular vote, Kamala Harris with 47.5% of the popular national vote. Remember, back in 2016, Trump, when he won the White House, he won the Electoral College, but not the popular vote. This year, he was able to do that. And I want to take a look at what Donald Trump will have to look forward to working in Washington and that balance of power. Let's start with the U.S. Senate. Okay, here's where things stand in the Senate right now. 51 senators needed for a majority in the U.S. Senate, and you can see Republicans right now have a slim majority, 52 senators. There are a few races right here that have yet to be called. Democrats have 44, so it's unclear if Republicans, if their majority will stay at 52 or if they will have an even larger majority. That would certainly help Donald Trump as he seeks to get his policies passed. And one more thing I want to show you, Josh, before I send it back over to you, the balance of power in the House of Representatives. This is still being decided at this moment. Still a few more races that need to be called. You need 218 for the majority. Republicans at 201, Democrats at 186. It appears that Republicans may take control of the House of Representatives, but unclear right now. Still a few races yet to be called, Josh.
Okay, Ayanna, thank you so much. We're going to turn to my colleague Errol Lewis, the New York One political anchor and host of The Big Deal. Donald Trump will be the first president who is a convicted felon to take the White House. He's also facing sentencing in that case in New York later on this month. He has been indicted multiple times federally. He has been civilly found liable of sexual abuse. What happens to all of these cases?
Well, I don't know about all of them, but I can tell you about some of the cases. The federal case, the federal investigation, the U.S. attorney, the special prosecutor, a lot of this is going to just simply get overturned. When Donald Trump takes control of the Justice Department, he'll name his own attorney general. He can then order Jack Smith to go on vacation, basically end that investigation. The 93 U.S. attorneys who are throughout the country who are mounting all kinds of different investigations, they will also largely be replaced in a lot of cases. So a lot of the manpower in the Justice Department is going to shift hands. As far as that felony conviction in a New York state court, not a federal court, so he can't pardon himself. There's none of that available to him. The U.S. attorney has nothing to do with it. The Justice Department has nothing to do with it. However, under New York law, it's very easy. After sentencing is pronounced, and that's scheduled to happen later this month, Donald Trump can appeal it, and he will, as he should. He has the right to do that. If those appeals stretch into January, and that can very, very easily happen, he'll then be a sitting president, and whatever sentence is being imposed by this state court will basically have to be stayed for the length of his presidency. So he'll basically buy himself a 4-year vacation from imposition of whatever sentence comes down later this month.
Does he have to show up in court, do you know?
For sentencing in a criminal case? Oh, yeah, that's not optional.
Wow.
Because, in fact, there could be incarceration as one of the penalties. And again, right now he's not the president. He has no particular immunity. He has no particular claim on immunity. All of that will change after he is sworn in on January 21st next year.
Okay, thank you. We're going to come back to you in just one moment. Let's turn to some of our other political anchors. Holly Gregory is in Florida. Holly, I wanted to ask you a provocative question because I asked it because it was brought up, I don't know if it was last night or early this morning during our live coverage, and I didn't get a chance to get your response. Do you have any opinion as to whether Kamala Harris's gender was a liability in this race?
I really don't think that it was, by and large. Could there be some people, some sliver of the electorate who had a problem with that? Of course. But overall, no, that is not why Kamala Harris lost this election. I mean, if you think about it, Joe Biden, if he had still been the nominee, he was going to lose this election as well. And it wasn't because of his gender. There was a factor, it was partially because of his age. They wanted to eliminate that. That's why they got rid of him. But he was going to lose it regardless. And the reason for that is clear. It doesn't even need to be overthought because voters have been saying for years, for 2 years, what their problem was with the Biden-Harris administration. They have said for the past 2 years consistently, 2/3 of the country believed that the country was on the wrong track, that they wanted a change. Well, how can you be the change agent if you're the administration in charge. Harris could not separate herself from that. It was the Biden-Harris administration. And in those same polls, there was no mystery. Time after time, it was the economy, number one, border followed closely behind, and you had a majority of people, including Democrats, who agreed that there needed to be a measure of deportations. That was reflected in polling of both parties. So the electorate didn't hide how they were feeling, and it wasn't related to Harris's gender in any way. And I think you also, as we start to see some of the data come in as to who was voting and why, it's fascinating to look at some of the statistics we're seeing. For example, here in Florida, Trump won Latino men by 28%. We saw that reflected with Latino votes across the country, very much so here in Florida. Also, suburban women. That was supposed to be, you're asking about gender, that was supposed to be Harris's, bread and butter in this election. Trump in some places won that, in single digits, not a huge blowout there, but he won it. It wasn't that he kept it close, kept the margins close, he won it. Also, in rural areas, blowout margins for Trump. That wasn't a surprise. Native Americans coming out in force for Trump, and even urban voters for Trump. So to then say, you can't paint those people with a broad brush and say, well, it was just a problem of her being a woman. I think that would be a big oversimplification. To say it wasn't a factor for some people, I don't think you can say that, but by and large, I think it was very clear. This was border and economy, period.
Okay, it looks like Kamala Harris is coming out soon. And Alex, I wanted to get to you just for a moment because you brought it up last night about Kamala Harris's gender being a liability. Briefly, can you discuss what your analysis is of this? And forgive me if I have interrupted. It looks like the Vice President will come out pretty soon, so go ahead.
I understand it, and with all due respect to Holly, I'm going to politely disagree, and I think as proof of that, I'm just going to point back to 2019 when Kamala Harris first ran for president, and I will tell you, watching her here, some of the most ardent opponents and not fans of Kamala Harris at that time were women. Democratic women of color who publicly might smile and nod and say, yes, how great would it be to have a woman as president, but privately had very strong feelings. I think back to all those coconut memes and what coconut actually meant, and Kamala Harris talking about her mother. And on the one hand, young people and a lot of folks on the left really seized that as this wonderful way of complicated women, at times messy women being seen for who they are in all their facets. Maybe the rest of the country is really not ready for that. There were a lot of people who also hated that whole notion of coconuts and made fun of Kamala Harris's laugh. Let's remember that our now president-elect has not actually pronounced her name correctly. On many occasions played "It Is a Man's World" at many of his rallies, and have used some words to describe Kamala Harris that I could not say on air. So I think gender may play more of a role than we think.
Alex, what are we expecting to hear from the Vice President now?
I think that's a huge question. And the big question is, as so many people who support Kamala Harris are waking up today feeling sad, broken, angry, what does she say? Does she make a peaceful transition of power? Does she acknowledge potential missteps? I think it is a very fine needle to thread. I'm actually thinking today of a friend of mine who met with none other than Barack Obama the day after the 2016 election and was expecting to see Barack Obama, who was totally despondent and sad, and said he was very calm, cool, and collected. Politicians know that this is the pendulum of history. It swings big in one direction, and it swings big in another. And what I'm expecting today is seeing a calm, cool, collected Kamala Harris, who really invites Donald Trump to welcome all people in this country. If Donald Trump is truly promising an America that is better for all, to live up to those promises by listening to all Americans. That is along the lines of what I'm expecting to hear today.
Thank you, Alex. Let's go to Jason Fechner out in the Blue Wall State, at least it was 4 years ago, in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has now gone red. Jason, what do you think happened in your great state?
Josh, great question. Of course, this was a state that President Joe Biden and former President Trump were divided by less than a point back in 2020 when Biden flipped the state back blue. And sure enough, this was roughly a 50,000 vote flip back red for President-elect Donald Trump going forward. And when you kind of run through some of the preliminary numbers of the 72 counties that are out there, Harris kind of lost ground in 68 of those counties. She only made up ground compared to President Joe Biden in 4 counties out there. So especially in rural communities across Wisconsin, Harris fared worse than Biden had overall about 4 years ago. Then Democrats, of course, had talked about banking a lot of the votes in the metropolitan areas of Madison, where the UW-Madison campus is. Milwaukee, of course, a stronghold, and up in and around Green Bay, Lambeau Field, the Packers, the Bow counties. And sure enough, when push came to shove overnight into Wednesday morning, I think a lot of the Democrats realized they didn't have as many of those absentee ballots, obviously, that they had banked on back in 2020 to kind of carry them through that margin and get them across the finish line here in Wisconsin. So this time around, the numbers just really didn't add up for them. Still, once again, very close here in Wisconsin. We're getting very used to very close elections here in Wisconsin when it comes to presidential politics. And to kind of echo a little bit of what Holly had mentioned earlier, when you run through so many different scenarios and you play Monday morning quarterback here now on a Wednesday, what worked, what didn't work, I go back to a Marquette Law School poll here in Wisconsin back in October, and the two main issues that Holly had mentioned there, the economy and immigration, when it came to which of the candidates would do better for the voters here in Wisconsin, Trump had a 15-point lead when it came to both of those categories there. So while the polls themselves to those undecided voters over the last couple of days leading up into Tuesday, those were the big driving factors to get them out to the polls out there. And with Trump ahead by 15 points in both of those, obviously I think that that's where things then fell into Tuesday night and Wednesday morning, flipping the state back to Trump.
Jason, I want to stick with you for 1 second. I think a lot of people don't get this because they look at headlines and they look at the stock market doing very well, inflation going down significantly, it being worse in other countries. They see their own, if they own property, it has gotten a lot, a lot more lucrative. And yet there's a real disconnect. Those are people who maybe have voted for Harris. There are many, many people who see all of that and don't actually feel it in their wallets. And I'm sure there are a bunch of them in your state.
Josh, it's 100% the issue here. Unemployment in Wisconsin is well below the national average, so that has been fantastic. Democrats and Republicans over the last few months, the Republican Party of Wisconsin was regimented, and they were so on message over the last few months when it came to the talking point whenever one of these Democratic candidates came to campaign here, which was dozens of times over the last couple of months, of course, with Harris and Walz here. Often, they would always put out a statement. They would always hold a press conference, and the initial thing that they would say every single time, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago when it comes to your grocery prices and the gas prices that are out there? So regardless of where things are at for people's retirement accounts, 401ks, home prices way up in Wisconsin over what they were just 4 years ago here, I think that that message really resonated with a lot of undecided Wisconsinites out there because those are the prices that they see day in and day out. The price at the pump, the price at the grocery store, those are obviously a lot higher. And I think any messaging from the Democrats, including President Joe Biden, who tried to touch on this often when it came to global inflation, that this wasn't just a problem here in the U.S., this was a worldwide issue, and Democrats often point to COVID-19, the pandemic, the ongoing fallout from that as what was the driving force behind inflation here in the U.S. and all around the world. And I don't necessarily think that that message resonated with a lot of voters, undecided voters in particular here in Wisconsin, that they were able to kind of wipe out that disadvantage for Harris leading up into Tuesday.
All right, Jason, thank you. Cassie, let me go to you as we wait the vice president to come out and offer her concession speech. There was one moment that I think a lot of people are going to be talking about in this campaign, which is when she was on The View. It was a very friendly audience. She was asked a question about how she would be different from Joe Biden, and she said she couldn't think of anything. Do you think at that moment, if she had said something different, if she had pivoted, that it could have made a difference in this?
I do do think so. I mean, hindsight, of course, being 2020. And yesterday, Meghan McCain actually tweeted out that exact same reference that you mentioned on The View. She was asked how she would be different than Joe Biden, and she said she couldn't think of anything. And then she joked afterwards that she would appoint a Republican to her cabinet if elected, and that would be the main difference between her and Joe Biden. And perhaps it did hurt her. She had trouble, as Holly alluded to before, separating that. I'm going to let you guys listen in. The vice president is coming out now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you all. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. So let me say, and I love you back. And I love you back. So let me say, my heart is full today. My heart is full today, full of gratitude for the trust you have placed in me, full of love for our country, and full of resolve. The outcome of this election is not what we wanted, not what we fought for, not what we voted for, but hear me when I say, the light of America's promise will always burn bright. As long as we never give up, and as long as we keep fighting. To my beloved Doug and our family, I love you so very much. To President Biden and Dr. Biden, thank you for your faith and support. To Governor Walz and the Walz family, I know your service to our nation will continue. And to my extraordinary team, to the volunteers who gave so much of themselves, to the poll workers and the local election officials, I thank you all. Look, I am so proud of the race we ran, and the way we ran it, Over the 107 days of this campaign, we have been intentional about building community and building coalitions, bringing people together from every walk of life and background, united by love of country with enthusiasm and joy in our fight for America's future. And we did it with the knowledge that we all have so much more in common than what separates us. Now, I know folks are feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we must accept the results of this election. Earlier today, I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition. And and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power. A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. That principle, as much as any other, distinguishes democracy from monarchy or tyranny. And anyone who seeks the public trust must honor it. At the same time, in our nation, we owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States. And loyalty to our conscience and to our God. My allegiance to all three is why I am here to say, while I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. The fight for freedom, for opportunity, for fairness, and the dignity of all people. A fight for the ideals at the heart of our nation. The ideals that reflect America at our best. That is a fight I will never give up. I will never give up the fight for a future where Americans can pursue their dreams, ambitions, and aspirations, where the women of America have the freedom to make decisions about their own body and not have their government telling them what to do. We will never give up the fight to protect our schools and our streets from gun violence. And America, we will never give up the fight for our democracy, for the rule of law, for equal justice, and for the sacred idea that every one of us, no matter who we are or where we start out, has certain fundamental rights and freedoms that must be respected and upheld. And we will continue to wage this fight in the voting booth, in the courts, and in the public square. And we will also wage it in quieter ways, in how we live our lives, by treating one another with kindness and respect, by looking in the face of a stranger and seeing a neighbor, by always using our strength to lift people up, to fight for the dignity that all people deserve. The fight for our freedom will take hard work, but like I always say, we like hard work. Hard work is good work. Hard work can be joyful work. And the fight for our country is always worth it. It is always worth it. To the young people who are watching, it is... I love you. To the young people who are watching, it is okay to feel sad and disappointed. But please know it's going to be okay. On the campaign, I would often say, when we fight, we win. But here's the thing. Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win. That doesn't mean we won't win. The important thing is don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop trying to make the world a better place. You have power. You have power. And don't you ever listen When anyone tells you something is impossible because it has never been done before. You have the capacity to do extraordinary good in the world. And so to everyone who is watching, do not despair. This is not a time to throw up our hands. This is a time to roll up our sleeves. This is a time to organize, to mobilize, and to stay engaged for the sake of freedom and justice and the future that we all know we can build together. Look, many of you know I started out as a prosecutor, and throughout my career I saw people at some of the worst times in their lives. People who had suffered great harm and great pain, and yet found within themselves the strength and the courage and the resolve to take the stand, to take a stand, to fight for justice, to fight for themselves, to fight for others. So let their courage be our inspiration. Let their determination be our charge. And I'll close with this. There's an adage an historian once called a law of history, true of every society across the ages. The adage is, only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. I know many people feel like we are entering a dark time, but for the benefit of us all, I hope that is not the case. But here's the thing, America, if it is, let us fill the sky with the light of a brilliant, brilliant billion of stars. The light of optimism, of faith, of truth, and service. HU. And may that work guide us, even in the face of setbacks, toward the extraordinary promise of the United States of America. I thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. I thank you all.
Just heard Vice President Kamala Harris concede the election to Donald Trump. She spoke at Howard University after handily losing to the Republican who now returns to office as the nation's 47th president. Harris, the Democrat, sounded hoarse but resolved and even optimistic. Quote, "The light of America's promise will always burn bright," she said, "as long as we never give up, as long as we keep fighting." We're going to turn now to Cassie Simeon. She is at the rally. Cassie, this was not a despondent speech to my ear. She did emphasize that there will be a peaceful transition of power, and she did say that the fight, as I mentioned, will continue, just obviously from outside of government.
Yeah, absolutely. She began by thanking supporters for all they have done to get her to this moment. She reminded them of what they've been able to accomplish over the last 107 days of this campaign, a very short measure of time that she's been able to become the Democratic nominee and run in this campaign. She energized the Democratic base, just simply not enough of those Americans, perhaps undecided independents, who instead voted for the former president. And she said, listen, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to feel all the feelings. I am feeling them as well. And you could hear a little bit of emotion in her voice at. But, you know, in this speech, she really harped on hope, right? She talked about the darkness of the sky, that you can see the stars, and continuing this fight for reproductive rights, for protection from gun violence, to protect democracy, all key tenets of this campaign. She said, you know, we don't have to continue to fight this way. We can fight in quieter ways, through public service. And it didn't seem that she was despondent or hopeless. She said she is hopeful that things can be peaceful moving forward, and that the darkest days of America are not ahead of us, but behind us. And I think that is the message that Democrats really needed to hear right now that supported her. You know, there were a lot of emotions in this crowd before she even came out here. A lot of tears, a lot of hugs. You could tell people were very upset about the idea of a president-elect Donald Trump. She almost took a page out of President Joe Biden's book here, becoming consoler-in-chief of sorts, you know, the Democratic candidate consoler here on stage, telling people it will be okay, that she is not giving up the fight of this campaign. It will just look a little different now once she leaves office.
Taylor Poplar, thank you, Cassie. Taylor, let me go over to you in Florida with the Trump campaign. How do you think the Trump campaign will view this speech, if at all?
Honestly, Josh, I wouldn't be surprised if they acknowledge the speech but then want to move forward, because they're now very focused on the beginnings of the transition process and of getting a second Trump administration into place so that come Inauguration Day in a couple of months, they'll be full steam ahead. I do think what stood out in the vice president's remarks were kind of explicit messages to what she talked about occasionally on the campaign trail, which is that, in her opinion, Trump is a threat to democracy because of his refusal to accept the results back in 2020. Some of what she said: we must accept the results of this election. We will engage in a peaceful transfer of power. And while I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. 4 years ago, this very week, Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, and to this day, he has not conceded it. He has not admitted that he was defeated by President Joe Biden. And that's something that really stuck with Democrats and that really fueled both Biden's campaign before he abandoned it, and was an aspect of Harris's campaign, albeit less so. So I don't think the Trump team is really going to parse through a lot of Harris's words. They've been pretty quiet today beyond putting out that statement that said reacting to Harris calling Trump and conceding to him. So I've been refreshing Trump's Truth Social account. He has not posted anything since last night. We've reached out to his advisors to see if he's going to be speaking today. We haven't gotten any word of that. So it seems like they're taking a breath. They were also pretty much awake for the last 48 hours as they concluded this race. So I think it'll be interesting if they acknowledge it in any way, but I wouldn't be surprised if they just want to focus on their victory and the beginnings of putting this new administration together.
Errol Lewis, what does Kamala Harris do now? What role do you see her after Donald Trump is inaugurated?
Well, she's an elder statesperson in the Democratic Party. People will be turning to her for policy guidance, her opinion, speaking fees. She needs to make a living. She'll probably end up at some big consulting firm or some university, some other kind of sinecure from which she can both make a living and continue to speak out on public issues. She's relatively young. She doesn't look like she's ready to step off the stage yet. What she just did in this last 107 days is extraordinary, and including raising over $1 billion. And so I don't think all of that just goes away. This is a lifelong public servant. And so I would expect her to look for some way that she can continue to make a contribution.
Is she a pariah? Because Hillary Clinton was kind of a pariah after losing in 2016.
Well, you know, people were kind of sick of the Clintons at that point, frankly. They'd been around since the 1990s. By 2016, a lot of people were saying it's time for a new generation. She is, in this case, the new generation. So she ascends to senior leadership at a time when the Chuck Schumers and the Nancy Pelosi's and the Joe Bidens are stepping off the stage, the Jim Clyburns. This is now going to be Kamala Harris's party, at least in the short term. And of course, leadership of parties is called by a lot of different names, but in the end, it's a power struggle. So we can expect that to get started within the Democratic Party maybe later today.
Alex Cohen, let's go to you. You've covered Kamala Harris for a long time. Following up on what I asked Errol, what role do you see her playing in the party now after losing handily to Donald Trump?
Yeah, 100% agree with Errol that this is a very different situation than Hillary Clinton, to be sure. I do want to point out, I wouldn't put money on this, but Gavin Newsom's term as our governor is running out. There is already a very long list of prominent politicians running to replace him. Kamala Harris could put her name on that list. I don't think she will, but maybe this is a time realizing, look, I think the American people are fed up with a lot of things. The government, the media. I keep thinking of that word disrupt, and maybe Kamala Harris finds a way to disrupt many things and chooses a panel that is not any of those traditional ones, but still has impact on the American people. I think there's a lot of folks out there who would like to see that happen.
Holly Gregory, Kamala Harris's next role after losing so handily to Donald Trump, what do you see her doing?
I would agree with what Errol said. You know, I think she's probably not done. She's still got to make a living and go out and find something that is a good role for her. I would have no idea what that would be, but I can tell you some of the things that I picked up on that speech that I thought were interesting. I thought her best line was, "We owe loyalty not to a president or to a party, but to the Constitution." And then she went on to say that, you know, the fight continues that fuels this campaign. I think in defeat, you need to be defiant to a degree, and what I mean by that is you don't stay down. She's not staying down. She's getting back up. She's saying that the fight will go on. We'll see in what capacity that is. But I think for the party, when you get back up, you live to see another day. We didn't elect a king, we elected a president. We do that every 4 years, and no democracy is not going to die or change that. So you've got another presidential race coming up soon. And in the meantime, though, while you're getting that fight back in you, you need a little case of humility. Maybe take a minute to pause and say, okay, what went wrong? Because we're losing the popular vote, we're losing the Electoral College, we lost the blue wall, we lost control of the Senate, we may well lose control of the House. We cannot say it was just this gender or this race or just suburban people or just urban people. It was a broad coalition that Trump was able to appeal to. So they're also in that fight, in that defiance. I think it would behoove her and the Democratic Party to take a moment and be a little bit humble and say, what did we miss? Was it working class people who felt like they were getting crushed by inflation for 2 years, and that suffering was falling on deaf ears, and they were told to be quiet and don't talk about it, and you just don't understand how great Bidenomics is? Maybe a little self-reflection would go a long way as well.
I agree with you on that, Holly. Okay, let me turn over to Ayanna Harry. And there was a statement that came out, I don't know if you saw it, but I'll summarize it, from Bernie Sanders, saying that the Democratic Party had really abandoned its working class roots. It had become much too filled with people who are more advocates of the rich. And there was a very big split, as we've seen in this election, that those who are more educated tended to have voted, those who have more of advanced degrees, I should say, tended to vote more for Kamala Harris in swing states. Any thoughts about where the Democratic Party might want to turn now as they go through this wilderness, as Holly was mentioned, of soul searching?
The concerns of working class voters were certainly part of what we saw play out in one state in particular, and that is Pennsylvania. Josh, you and I were both political nerds, and in the weeks and days leading up to the election, as we were looking at some of the different potential paths to 270 for both candidates, it became clear that the path to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue would likely very much go through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Take a look right here. 19 Electoral College votes in Pennsylvania. We were bracing for the fact that, or the potential that we may not know the results from Pennsylvania for several days. But Donald Trump's lead in Pennsylvania was so significant that the state has already been called for him. Trump ultimately with 50.5% of the vote. Kamala Harris, 48.5% of the vote here in Pennsylvania. And I want to go ahead and just take a look at, some of the different counties that we can talk about. Erie County, this is an area where the working class concerns were certainly top of mind for many voters in Erie County. Take a look there. Erie County red. This county here is another interesting county, Bucks County. That's suburban Philadelphia. This was an area where Kamala Harris was expected to potentially win. I was surprised last night to see Bucks County come in as red for Donald Trump. And so these are some of the factors that helped lead to Trump's victory here in 2024, Josh?
Okay, very briefly, Taylor Poplar's Joe Biden is speaking tomorrow. Any sense as to what he might say?
You know, he's ending a 50-year career in politics in a way that he didn't want to. He got pushed out a couple months ago. I have to imagine he's not feeling great today.
Okay. Thank you all so much. Cassie Simeon, Taylor Poplar's, Errol Lewis, Ayanna Harry, Holly Gregory, Alex Cohen. We had Jason Fechner earlier. Thank you guys so much. And thank you at home for watching. I'm Josh Robin. More news right now on Spectrum News.
Journey towards improving mental health doesn't always present a clear path. Every Thursday on Your Mental Health, we listen to voices across our communities, discussing the challenges of everyday life and presenting accessible resources to guide us along the path to our well-being, providing hope and empowering choices that light the way to a healthier you.
Your Mental Health with Dr. Nicole Clark, Thursdays on Spectrum News Plus, available on all your favorite devices.